Welcome back to Things You Don't Know, the show where we take today's history's dirtiest little secrets, polish them slightly, sort of like polishing a turd sometimes, and then throw them directly at your sense of moral stability.
Today's episode is titled Allies of Convenience, or as I like to call it, we regret to inform you that everyone was just trying to survive and it got real weird.
Hey, yeah, okay, let's begin with a woman whose legacy could burn down a small library. Winnie Mandela. Not a name you may be totally familiar with here, but she was a revolutionary dissident, an icon, and the daughter of Columbus Mantazima, a cabinet minister, and the trans guy.
For those of you who haven't spent 20 years clunking around libraries, the Transkei was the first of South Africa's quote independent Bantustans under apartheid, which is like telling someone you're free to go and then locking the door behind them while handing them a flag. What I am referring to is that the African people in South Africa were given puppet states like Native American reservations based on their tribal origins. These territories were called Bantustans. They were exiled, sent to live in countries that didn't really exist, at least as independent nations.
Oh, yes. It was an apartheid sponsored Disneyland of pretend sovereignty. And Winnie's father, well, he helped run it. Not exactly the prequel that you'd exactly expect to the life of a woman who later became the face of fiery resistance. Just imagine if Rosa Parks' dad had been the lead bus driver, telling the black folk to sit in the back.
It gets messier because while Mandela was trying to navigate a job inside an illegitimate system, Winnie was out there saying, "This system needs to be set on fire, and I brought matches."
So we pose this to you, dear listeners. What happens when the daughter of the puppet state becomes the puppeteer of the revolution?
It's foreshadowing, my friend. It's all foreshadowing.
Yeah, now let's take a gentle leap into the flaming cauldron of World War II. God, I don't know how I'd want to take a gentle leap into a flaming cauldron. Mm.
Me either.
That
Indeed.
sounds a little hot for me. Um, the Stern Gang, also known as Lehi, was a fringe Zionist militia that thought, hey, you know who'd make great allies? The Nazis.
This was in 1941. The final solution to the Holocaust hadn't been formally articulated yet, but let's not pretend Nazi Germany was hiding its vibes. And still, Lehi sent a proposal to Hitler's government offering cooperation in exchange for help creating an authoritarian state and kicking the British out of Palestine.
This is the historical equivalent of texting your abusive ex because they happen to own a truck and you need help moving.
Like all bad ideas sent via political telegram, it was thankfully ignored. But it existed, it happened, and it reflects a recurring theme in this episode. Desperation turns ideology into origami.
Fold it right, and suddenly fascism looks like freedom. If you squint hard enough and ignore the death camps.
Which brings us to another act in this tragic comic theater, Hitler's baffling belief that Indian Brahmins and other high castes were Aryans.
Yes, this is real. The same man who made an entire state religion out of white superiority also did a little psychological or mythological yoga and decided that ancient Indo-Aryans gave Brahmins just enough racial clout to squeak into his master race.
Enter Subhas Chandra Bose. See our Deals with the Devil podcast to learn about him. He saw in Hitler and the Axis powers an opportunity to kick Britain out of India. He literally visited Hitler, and while Hitler didn't exactly roll out the red carpet, he didn't send him to a camp either.
Because racism, like fascism, is remarkably flexible when it thinks it can win.
The result? Bose led the Indian National Army with Japanese support, fighting the British on the Axis side. There are dozens of historical alliances where the alliances seem to be completely insane.
So, to recap, Winnie Mandela's father worked for apartheid's fake government. Zionist militants tried to collaborate with Nazis, and Hitler thought Sanskrit was sexy.
If you're feeling confused, uncomfortable, or mildly betrayed by the linear narrative, it gets worse. Nelson Mandela and Transky Prime Minister Kaiser Mantazima were relatives, actual blood cousins. Not just in the we're all comrades way, but in the we shared an ancestor and possibly an awkward family reunion way. Mantazima was the head of the Transkei government. Yes, the same Transkei that was apartheid's first homeland experiment. While Mandela was languishing in prison for trying to destroy apartheid, his cousin was serving as the regime's designated figurehead for fake black autonomy. So while Nelson Mandela is rotting in a Robben Island cell for fighting racism and apartheid, his literal cousin is getting a ceremonial hat from the apartheid government and cutting ribbons in a pretend parliament.
Now, that's not just betrayal, folks. That is soap opera betrayal. I mean, that's biblical betrayal. That's past potatoes and the structural racism of the family reunion.
And to be fair, Mantazima did support Mandela's early release later on, but the damage was done. He was basically apartheid's polite black spokesman, while the real anti apartheid heroes were being beaten with nightsticks.
The fact that the Mandela family tree included both the architect of a free South Africa and the figurehead of its most insulting political illusion is peak historical irony.
Okay, time for one more story before we crawl into a hole and contemplate the death of linear morality.
Let's talk about how, in the 1930s, Zionist paramilitary groups like the Haganah and especially Beitar, the youth wing of the revisionist Zionism, received actual training support from fascist Italy and authoritarian Poland. No, no, you didn't mishear that.
No, you didn't. So now let's start with Poland. Now, this is interwar Poland, mind you. Not democratic, not stable, and definitely not subtle. The Polish government had this charming idea. Hey, what if we help train Jewish youth to leave and go to Palestine? Not because they love Zionism, but just because they wanted fewer Jews in Poland.
Wow, wow. A win win for them. They supported Zionist militias like Beitar, gave them weapons training, and even allowed Zionist groups to run paramilitary camps. Because nothing says healthy society like arming an ethnic minority you're trying to quietly deport.
And then there's Mussolini's fascist Italy. Benito Mussolini, yes, El Duce, that one, allowed Beitar to open a naval training school in Civitavecchia near Naples in 1934. Italian officers trained future Zionist militants in seamanship. Why? Mussolini was not anti Semitic and wanted influence in the Middle East and figured arming Jewish nationalists might be a neat way to undercut the British and French colonial presence.
Spoiler alert, this plan did not age well at all.
Most of those same Zionists would later find themselves fighting the Axis powers, smuggling Jews out of Europe or mourning their families in death camps built by the same regimes that once handed them rifles and said, "Go get 'em, Tiger."
It's like doing a study abroad with your future executioner. Just a delightful little detour into the land of contradiction.
So the next time someone says history is complicated, tell them Poland trained Zionist militias to reduce its Jewish population, and Mussolini gave them a boat.
Then walk away slowly while they blink in Morse code. So let's tally the contradictions, shall we? First, Mandela maintained a relationship with his cousin who ran a puppet apartheid state. Second, the Zionists tried to team up with Nazis. Third, Hitler thought Sanskrit was cool enough to ignore his racist selectivity. Next, Indian nationalists guarded POWs for the Japanese. And fascist Europe, the last one, trained future Israeli soldiers who would later fight fascism.
If this all sounds like a fever dream wrapped in irony and gift in moral grace sludge, then congratulations. You've been exposed to history, the real kind. The kind that doesn't come with a theme song or a neat ending. And now, for a European twist of the episode, a tale of two Austrian chancellors who really messed up Hitler's LinkedIn vibe.
Enter Engelbert Dollfuss and Kurt Schuschnigg, the pre-Anschluss Austrian fascists. They led the Fatherland Front, Austria's version of fascism, but also Catholic, and rule with a charming blend of authoritarianism, corporatism, anti-Marxism, and don't talk back to the government or we'll ban your entire party.
That sounds familiar.
Sure does.
But here's the plot twist. They were not anti Semitic. In fact, both Dollfuss and Schuschnigg actively protected Jewish communities in Austria and opposed Hitler's racist anti Semitism. They saw Nazism as a dangerous pagan cult that threatened Austrian sovereignty and Catholic tradition.
To them, Hitler was just a Bavarian upstart with a mustache, too many flags, and deeply unchristian vibes.
They even collaborated with Austrian Jewish leaders, refused to adopt Nazi racial laws, and allowed Jewish Austrians full political participation in the 1930s while running a literal authoritarian regime.
I can hear you folks, so now you're thinking, wait a minute, I'm supposed to like these fascists?
Fat chance.
Yeah, no. But you're supposed to suffer morally. That's the point of this episode in history.
Dollfuss was assassinated by the Nazis in 1934, which almost triggered a war between Germany and Italy. Schuschnigg took over, tried to keep Hitler out, and eventually got annexed anyway. He was imprisoned by the Nazis and later testified at Nuremberg against them.
So, in a weird twist of fate, these Austrian fascists ended up as victims of the fascists with better branding. Sort of like being a villain in season one and then getting steamrolled by the newer, shinier villain in season two.
Good analogy. Now, let's
Thank you.
explore our final shotgun alliance, how the wartime partnership of the United States and the Soviet Union, so necessary, so costly, fell back into suspicion, borderlines, and barbed wire with remarkable speed.
Not a single switch flipped. More like a dimmer sliding down while everyone pretended the lights were just fine.
In June 1941, Hitler's invasion of the USSR explodes any fantasy of sitting out the European land war. The math is brutal. Only the Red Army can tie down the Wehrmacht on the ground. The U.S. answers with Lend-Lease, billions of dollars of food, trucks, rails, aircraft, and copper wire by the mile.
Churchill, who once called Bolshevism a plague, now calls Stalin comrade. Conferences at Tehran and later Yalta turned necessity into choreography. D-Day timing, zonings of occupation, vague promises about free
They
elections.
were vague on purpose. Each side plans to shape the peace where its troops actually stand. Logistics writes ideology in ink.
Even in victory photos, you can see the discord between the West and the communists. Now let's look at two early fractures.
The Soviets want a friendly, pliant Poland and entire Eastern Europe, but they'll settle for Poland. The Western allies want something closer to an independent and pluralist democracy. The Katan massacre has made trust radioactive. Everyone says democracy, but no one means the same thing.
Yeah, let's take a look at the Warsaw Uprising in 1944. The Polish Home Army rises against the Nazis. The Red Army halts on the Vistula. To Poles, that pause looks like a strategy. Let the Nazis destroy the non-communist resistance. To Moscow, it's logistics and blood. Either way, the alliance loses innocence.
Those moments linger on both sides. They don't end the alliance, but they certainly curdle it.
Yalta, February 1945. The Big Three sign on to declarations about free and unfettered elections, while privately accepting a map that follows armies more than ballots.
Potsdam, summer 1945, is different though. Roosevelt is gone. Truman brings a lawyer's Christmas, and after the successful atomic test, quiet leverage, Churchill is replaced mid-conference. The tone hardens.
Borders shift, populations are moved, reparations get argued like a divorce settlement. The war coalition technically still exists, but the center cannot hold without a common enemy.
1946 and 47 is the hinge converting disagreements into a full-fledged Cold War. Here are three snapshots. In 1946, Soviet troops linger in northern Iran. Washington pushes back at the UN. Moscow eventually steps back. It is the first test of wills outside Europe.
Churchill puts public words to what people see privately. Eastern Europe falling under the communists.
Then later on in 46, we have the long telegram. George Kennan's analysis frames the USSR as both an ideological superpower and insecure. His translation for policy, contain communism, don't have a full-fledged crusade.
Meanwhile, the Soviets look west and see the atom bomb, delayed second fronts, and a century of invasions across their plains. To them, buffers are not optional, they are oxygen.
In 1947, the Truman Doctrine is passed. It's aid to Greece and Turkey, but really a declaration. The U.S. will step into political vacuums where Britain and France can't anymore. Containment leaves the theoretical stage.
The same year, the Marshall Plan, economic recovery as a strategy. Open books, open ports, open credit. It's idealism with ledgers.
From Moscow, it reads as encirclement via economic prosperity. Eastern governments are pressured to reject Marshall Plan aid. There are two Europes and two recovery models.
Then comes the Berlin blockade, 1948-49. Stalin bets that squeezing access to the city will force Western concessions. The West bets it can fly in a city's daily bread.
The airlift works. It also teaches both sides the new game of the Cold War: pressure without a direct war, theater without apocalypse.
The atomic bomb changes everything and nothing. It it ends one war and sows the seeds of the next. The Soviets detonate their own device in 1949. The arms race formalizes the distrust already alive on the ground.
Each side builds a story. In Washington, it's we fed and armed a dictator to beat a worse one. Now we must not repeat the mistake. In Moscow, it's we bled out Nazism while the West withheld help till the last minute and then tried to buy our neighbors.
Both stories contain truth. Both omit the parts that complicate action as well.
It's tempting to think about counterfactuals which bring hope into history, but let's tread lightly with realities. An earlier clarity at Yalta would have led to compromise? Maybe, but words yielded to armies. A shared administration of Poland or Germany with stronger guarantees. Paper without power is just piety. A unified Berlin, neutral outside bloc politics. It's tempting, but the city's symbolism made compromise hard to sell at home on either side.
The better question is narrower. Could leaders have managed the transition with fewer shocks? Perhaps. Transparency about spheres, slower propaganda, and more joint commissions might have lowered the temperature. But lower isn't low.
Putting on my historian hat here, the US USSR alliance left three legacies: a proof of concept, democracies and a dictatorship can align against the greater menace, however briefly; a moral receipt, looking away from allies' sins, has a half life measured in decades; an operating manual for the new world, conferences, combined logistics, and intelligence sharing that later Cold War institutions would echo, NATO on one side and the Warsaw Pact on the other.
And a paradox, the very scale of cooperation made the break harsher. The climb down from comrade to counterpart to adversary was a continuous fall. The alliance that beat Hitler was a bridge across a river in flood. It was meant to be crossed, not lived on. Once on the far bank, each side built a fort facing the other.
If there's a takeaway from this story, it's less about doom than discipline. Coalitions of necessity demand two exit plans, one for the enemy and one for each other.
Well, listen, thank you guys for tuning in to Things You Don't Know. Stay curious and keep learning about the bizarre.
Yeah, I hope you got a few little nuggets from this one and that you'll think about it. Goodbye for now.
Ladies and gentlemen, please leave us a comment and a like, and come back soon to this site and to our sister site, History Twists. A lot of interesting things going on in both. Take care.